Hello, everybody. For those of you who are already logged into our YouTube live event, please just bear with us for another minute. We'd like to allow a little more time for some other participants to join before we get started. And while you're waiting, if you haven't done so already, I'd like to invite you to please subscribe to our MACS Worldwide YouTube channel and help support the quality, professional, mobile AC information and training that you've come to expect from MACS through training programs like these. So good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to today's special presentation of MACS 2020 Mobile AC Update webinar. My name is Steve Shaber, and I'm the Manager of Service Training for MACS Worldwide, the Mobile Air Conditioning Society. And today I'm broadcasting live from the classroom here at MACS headquarters in Lansdale, Pennsylvania. So as you all are aware, I'm sure, we have a coronavirus pandemic in the US, and our governor in Pennsylvania was quick to shut down Montgomery County, which is where we're located. Because of that, we decided to take our 2020 Mobile AC Update Clinic and make a shortened webinar version of that to present for our members today. So for those of you that are familiar with our Update Clinic, typically it's a 3-hour class that we'll hold in the evenings. But what we did was we went through, picked a couple of interesting topics, put them together into a PowerPoint that I pre-recorded, and typically the Update Clinic goes through those topics first, and then towards the end, we'll do the industry update. So the industry update information comes from the previous MACS training event and trade show, which we just had in Nashville. We had an update from EPA and SAE standards. So I've included what I could. It's kind of hard to get everything you want into a 30-minute presentation. So if you want to get more information, you can get it on our website. And also, if you want to get a copy of the update book, we also have those available on the website too. So with that, I'm going to start the webinar presentation. It's going to run for about 30 minutes. And once the webinar is over, then I'm going to come back on and I'm going to answer whatever questions that we have. So again, thanks for joining us. Let's start the webinar and I'll see you in about 30 minutes. And welcome to a special presentation of MACS Worldwide's 2020 Mobile AC Update. My name is Steve Shaber, and I'm the Manager of Service Training for MACS Worldwide, the Mobile Air Conditioning Society. Let's take a look at the topics we'll cover today. First, we'll begin with a few case studies that include an SUV, a popular pickup truck, and a family minivan. We'll also learn about leak detection and an interesting airflow problem that was found in a job site work truck. Then we'll get an industry update that includes EPA and refrigerant regulations, Section 609 certification, and R-1234yf purchase restrictions. Are you Section 609 certified? What is Section 609 certification? A part of the U.S. Clean Air Act of 1990, it is a federal law that requires technicians to be certified to recover and recycle refrigerant. It also restricts the sale of mobile AC refrigerants to certified persons. You can become Section 609 certified through the MACS program via online testing at our website. Just visit www.maxw.org and click on certification. The cost of the test is $20 per technician. We also offer paper testing that you can do at home through self-study or through leader-led classes all over the country at many colleges and tech schools. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank all MACS members who are watching this webinar. After all, you are the reason we do what we do, and everyone in the MACS community appreciates your continued support. Have you heard about the MACS app? Created exclusively for MACS members, the MACS app is your source for mobile AC diagnostic information. Covering automotive and light truck systems going back more than 30 years, the MACS app can tell you the type and quantity of the factory refrigerant charge, along with oil type and amount required. It also has assembly diagrams and wiring schematics too. You can also find links to all of the MACS manufacturer and parts distributor members' websites, an archive of Action Magazine, and our monthly newsletter, MACS Service Reports. We even have exclusive air conditioning information for most AGCO brands of agricultural equipment. If you're a MACS member and you haven't tried it out yet, download the MACS app today. It's available at both the Apple App Store and for Android on Google Play. And now that our introduction is complete, let's get started. Sometimes we think too hard. Thinking too hard, or a related issue, thinking too hard about the wrong things, is a way to misdiagnose a problem, leading to going off on a tangent, as the expression goes. The car, a 2005 Honda Pilot, that big SUV, was encountering a battery rundown problem. Well, the battery was 4 years old, and so the road service quick fix was to install a new battery, which is exactly what the technician did. The car was driven to the shop for other service and left in the parking lot. However, while the car was sitting there, the technician went out to pick up the old battery to return it for core credit. When he got out there, he found the HVAC control head was on and the blower motor was running at high speed, but with the keys hanging up in the shop. Well, that seemed to indicate that maybe the old battery wasn't really the problem in the first place, although the new battery wasn't going to be removed for reinstallation of the old one, that's for sure. So the technician probed the HVAC control head and found that indeed there was power going to the head, even with the ignition turned off. He concluded there must have been something wrong with the ignition feed circuit. He disconnected the blower, but the HVAC control head was still powered up. Fortunately, before he did something like replace the HVAC control head or ignition switch, he took some time and looked at the wiring diagram. That turned on the bulb in his head because while the blower relay coil is on the ignition circuit, the relay contacts are on the feed circuit from the 40 amp fuse in the underhood relay fuse box. Yep, the relay contacts were sticking closed, and a new relay was the easy fix. When the quick check is misleading. When you think you know an HVAC system, check to see how that system actually works, as you're often likely to have missed something. And when it's a simple so-called manual AC system, we'll double down on that. And we'll include taking a look at the wiring diagram. And for good measure, be prepared to go beyond your long-cherished quick checks. Here's something that's not just another case history. The vehicle is a 2015 Chevy light-duty full-size pickup truck with the 5.3-liter V8. The compressor had apparently failed, and the technician installed a replacement, also changed a condenser because he believed a failed compressor always fills the condenser with debris, and we guess for good measure, he replaced the suction line too. The truck soon returned with a poor cooling complaint. A second technician decided to check voltage to the clutch coil, and it was a normal 12 volts. With pressure gauges connected, he ran a jumper from the battery to the coil, and although the compressor spun smoothly, it wasn't pumping. The technician noticed that the system had a stretchy belt, and it seemed to be slipping. He got a replacement, which interestingly came with a low-cost special tool for installation. We've seen more nicely finished stretchy belt tools, such as Lyle number 59370. Let's watch a short video about how this tool works.
This combination removal and installation tool helps prevent damage to the stretch belt and pulley. Please note, most stretch belt manufacturers do not recommend that stretch belts be reused. Please consider the age and condition of the belt if reused. The preferred use is on the crankshaft pulley when clearance allows. On many applications, the groove in the tool fits over the lip of the pulley. Unique magnetic faces hold the tool in place on the pulley during use. The tool works on the front or back of the pulley depending on belt configuration. Position the tool so that the wedge-shaped remove side of the tool fits between the belt and pulley. Use a hand ratchet to turn the crankshaft in the direction that will rotate the pulley and tool to slip the belt over the tool and off the pulley. The tool can be used on either the crankshaft pulley or accessory pulley. When installing stretch belts, use the same pulley that was used during the removal. Position the tool so the smaller install side of the tool overlaps the pulley. Place the belt to be installed on the opposite pulley. Use a hand ratchet to turn the crankshaft in the direction that will rotate the pulley and tool with the tapered tab guiding the belt back onto the pulley. Once the belt is installed, make sure the belt ribs are aligned properly on the pulley.
The technician ran the jumper to the coil once more, and any pumping by the compressor was minimal at most, and he was ready to install another compressor. But he disconnected the jumper and turned on the AC via the dashboard controls. This time the compressor pumped. What's happening here? A look at the wiring diagram explains it all. In addition to the clutch, the compressor has an electronically controlled solenoid valve, and all the jumper wire does is energize the clutch. With the solenoid not activated, it had defaulted to a minimum displacement. Many technicians have the incorrect impression that if there's a clutch, that's it for compressor control. Obviously, that's not so. Without the original parts, we can't tell if the compressor failure was only in the solenoid or a connector that had come off. If the connector was off and out of sight, that could explain why the technician might have seen only a single connection at the clutch. At one time, a compressor with a control valve might be clutchless, but no more. By the way, if you've worked on one of these late model GM vehicles with an EVDC, electronically controlled variable displacement compressor, you may have noticed that there's a smiley face on the compressor's ID label. Anyone want to take a guess as to what it means? The smiley face indicates that the compressor is designed to work with not only R-134A, but also the new R-1234yf refrigerant. Pretty interesting AC trivia question, don't you think? Leak detection. Just keep in mind, the most effective methods of leak detection are trace dye and use of an electronic leak detector that meets the latest SAE standards, J2791 for R134A and J2913 for R1234yf. And we've found that a technician's choice is typically based on his long-term shop experience. If he's found the leaks with one of these two methods, he'll continue to use it until it starts to fail him. So, a natural question would be, why would one method start to fail? The answer is in the type of leak and/or the location of the leak. Our position has long been to prefer a premium electronic leak detector as a first step for these reasons. An electronic probe can reach into places that would require extensive parts removal for visual inspection with trace dye. Trace dye has to mix with refrigerant oil and then leak out to be visible to a technician with a black light. That can take a long time to happen, particularly with today's systems that retain all but a small amount of oil within the compressor for operating efficiency. Additionally, a compressor shaft seal, one of the most common locations of hard-to-find leaks, can be a real bear because the seal is on the low pressure side of the system and slow to be visible, particularly if what little oil that escapes is trapped in a well inside the compressor nose. The fact is that some leaks, certainly at shaft seals, also at some joints, only show up when the system is running. But you can't probe the system with an electronic leak detector when the system is running. That means there are leaks you'll only find if you run a system with trace dye in it. One reason why many industry engineers continue to put trace dye pellets into the system on the assembly line. They have plenty of empirical evidence that it works. And they also know that their real-world tests show that their compressors, whose oil separators are supposed to keep the oil within the pump mechanism, allow somewhat more oil through into refrigerant circulation than some rating they may have. So the trace dye works somewhat better than what might be expected. If you like the information in this presentation, you can get similar every month by reading MACS monthly newsletter, MACS Service Reports. The MSR is a technical publication with no advertising that covers mobile AC, heating, and engine cooling system topics in depth, including SAE standards information, theory of operation, and technical case studies, among other popular topics. You'll also like MAC's award-winning Action magazine. Published 8 times per year, Action is the journal of record for our industry, loaded with timely information for our members and other service shops. Both Action magazine and the MSR are MACS member benefits. And if you really want to go all out, you'll love attending MAC's annual training event and trade show. This past February, we had a great event in Nashville, Tennessee at the Gaylord Opryland Resort. And next year, MACS 2021 will be back in Orlando, Florida, this time at the Rosen Center on February 3 through 6. Join us there for 3 days of mobile AC technical and shop management classes, as well as an industry trade show on Friday that focuses on mobile AC. You'll be glad you did. No heat most of the time. The coolant on a 2010 Chrysler minivan, the Town & Country with both front and rear HVAC systems, warms up, although somewhat slowly. The thermostat opens at just under 200 degrees Fahrenheit, and the system will blow hot air, about 150 degrees Fahrenheit, from the heater ducts. But the next time the technician checks for heat, the outlets won't top 100. For some reason, the technician not only checked the water pump, but he convinced himself that it needed replacement. After reassembly, he used an airlift vacuum tool to top up the system, but the problem remained. So, what's the next step? Well, in this general sequence, it has to be the thermostat, of course. So, a new thermostat was installed. If the coolant temperature at the thermostat housing had been changing in accordance with the problem he had, that wouldn't be the worst thing he could do. But the temperature at the housing outlet was consistent with the thermostat opening at just under 200 degrees Fahrenheit every time. A new stat wasn't likely to do anything, and we'll reassure you by admitting it didn't. Well, how about a restriction in the heater circuit? That seems like a reasonable thought. The technician finds that both hoses to the rear heater are cold, and so he disconnects them from the core and connects them together to bypass the rear heater altogether, in case that was plugged. But there was no improvement. However, he flushes the rear heater core and reconnects the hoses to see if that has any effect, which it doesn't. Next, he checks the front heater hoses, and the outlet is much cooler, which pretty well indicates limited coolant flow, therefore a restriction. So once more, he takes out his flushing tool and repeats the procedure on the front core. But again, no change. If you were wondering, he was using the Pulsating HECAT flushing tool marketed by Gates, and not some tool of questionable value. And when he was done, the flow was good in each case. But he had heard that plugged heaters, under some conditions, will show good flow, so he replaced the heater core. Once more, no fix. Actually, if there's good water flow through the heater, it's probably not plugged, although there are some rare exceptions when a section is blocked. And blowing shop air through the heater core can also be deceptive. Good airflow is not proof of a clear heater core. The answer would have been apparent if he had checked the coolant flow diagram. It plainly shows there's supposed to be coolant flow through an engine oil cooler in the circuit. It's right by the oil filter, in series with the heater return line to the engine. Disconnecting the coolant hoses at the oil cooler and making a temporary connection to each other restored the system heater function. And when he used his flusher tool on the oil cooler, the debris came out and the system, both front and rear, was back to normal. Another warning about construction vehicles: poor airflow. Jobs that require removing the dashboard are so onerous on late models that technicians are becoming increasingly wary of the possibility, even if they think the need is obvious, that there just might be something else involved. The problem is a common one: no airflow in any mode position on a 2011 Ram 3500 truck. There's no cabin air filter, which eliminates that possibility, although for a work truck, as this one was, there should be. The mode doors seem to be moving, and there's no indication that the ductwork has shifted or somehow moved. The technician checked for trouble codes, and there were none. The blower sounds fine, but the technician removed it for an inspection just because that was easier than going for a dashboard removal at this point. And even if he eventually had to take it out, the blower removal would not have been wasted effort. With the blower out, he could see some debris in the HVAC case, so he decided to make a more detailed inspection using a borescope with a camera. That made the problem really apparent. The evaporator core was caked in mud and more debris. It was a bit messy to clean it out with brushwork and soapy water, but that dealt with the issue, and it was a lot less onerous than pulling the dashboard. The truck was used on construction sites, so this really should not have been a surprise. And once he saw the buildup on the evaporator, he had to admit, I should have thought of this originally. As a preventative maintenance measure, he installed a universal filter kit at the air inlet. If you have customers with vehicles used at construction sites, you'll be doing them a favor if you recommend installation of an air filter kit before a similar problem occurs. AC airflow switches to defrost. Sort of obvious. The symptom made the problem area very apparent. As the 2009 Ford Explorer XLT with the 4.0-liter six-cylinder was cruising down the road, with the manual air conditioning on, the airflow through the AC registers would stop and switch to the defrost outlet. A brief time later, the flow would resume from the registers when the driver took his foot off the gas pedal. The symptom also occurred during hard acceleration, or wide open throttle. The HVAC has vacuum actuators, and defrost is the default position when vacuum is lost. Probably a cracked vacuum hose or neck on the reservoir. No, nothing wrong there. The technician did notice a slight air noise on acceleration. So, where can the leak be? He removed the control panel and checked for source vacuum at the function control switch with the engine running. It was good, so he checked the operation of the function control switch with a manual vacuum pump, and no leaks showed up. Then he checked the mode vacuum switch assembly, but again, no apparent leaks could be found. Was he missing something? Yes, although the vacuum source line connection was good when he checked at the function switch, how about the check valve at the underhood connection, the real source of vacuum? Easy enough to test, just take it out and make a direct hose connection to the vacuum source neck. Now the vacuum mode control is lost only at open throttle. Install a new check valve and the problem is solved. GM factory die leak TSB. GM reports that some of their 2017 and 18 full-size trucks and SUVs may have a low refrigerant charge or a refrigerant leak resulting in symptoms of an inoperative compressor clutch or insufficient cooling performance. If you encounter one of these, inspect the receiver dehydrator plug at the bottom of the desiccant tube on the driver's side of the condenser. Dye is usually evident at the plug connection. If there are signs of leaking, you may have to replace the dryer plug assembly. This is also a good time to replace the desiccant tube as well. Dye will appear more prominently on high mileage vehicles and on systems with more severe leaks. However, signs of dye might be harder to see on lower mileage vehicles. Dye should not be found at the blind coupler or tube connections with this condition. And here's a quick tip. Depending on vehicle AC usage, the leak may not be visible as dye may not have fully circulated throughout the entire AC system. The AC system may need to be recharged and dye added before a test drive is performed to circulate the dye. Refer to the full TSB number 18-NA-156 for additional information and part numbers. This brings up a few important reminders. The aforementioned GM TSB reminds us of changes such as the relocation of receiver dryers. Desiccant cartridges on the inside of condensers is commonplace practice on many newer vehicles. OEMs include dyes in most vehicles these days, so don't overdo it by adding a lot more. Adding more dye than needed actually reduces the dye's luminosity. Most of us add dye in the form of a liquid, and part of that liquid is usually a universal refrigerant oil. Too much oil can be nearly as detrimental as not enough oil. And refrigerant oils, refrigerants, and coolants are constantly changing. Now let's get an industry update on what's going on in the broader mobile AC industry. EPA issued new regulations that took effect in 2018, the most prevalent of which placed a purchase restriction on all mobile AC refrigerants. You're probably aware that prior to 2018, you did not need any type of training certificate, or a MACS card as it's called, to purchase refrigerants like R-1234A. If you do have your MACS card, then you know it can be used to purchase small cans and 30-pound cylinders of R12, 30-pound cylinders of R-134A, and 10-pound cylinders of R-1234yf. That same EPA regulation also addressed the purchase of small cans. Except for small cans of R12, there is an exemption to the purchase restriction for small cans of R-134A and small cans of R-1234yf, as long as they are equipped with a self-sealing valve. It's because of this rule that you've seen a new style of connector on top of small cans at the store. Special adapters are required to use these self-sealing cans, so don't try to use your old can taps. Prior to 2018, small cans used a piercing type adapter, which would puncture the top of the can with a sharp pin. But these new valves can easily be damaged by those old taps. Make sure you use the right one. We've been waiting for a new EPA regulation for a while now, and it looks like 2020 may be the year. There are a few topics we expect them to address, but let's start with rule number 20. If you look back through the U.S. Federal Register, which is where all of EPA's rules and regulations are recorded, you'll find that since the original Clean Air Act amendments of 1990, there have been 21 additional rules over the years. One of the things that rule number 20 said was that R-134a would no longer be allowed for use in new vehicles beginning with the 2021 model year. That didn't mean we had to stop using R-134a by 2021, just that car manufacturers had to use something else in new production. EPA was quickly sued by two chemical manufacturers who basically said that EPA does not have the authority to regulate greenhouse gases like R-134a, but rather only ozone depleters like R-12. The case went back and forth in U.S. District Court, which agreed, throwing out that part of EPA's rule. Meanwhile, EPA issued rule number 21, which for us means the purchase restrictions. But now that this has happened, EPA is reconsidering many of their own rules, including numbers 20 and 21. So to date, we're still waiting to hear from EPA, but we do expect to hear some news soon. Now, that being said, EPA has already begun work on what may possibly become rule number 22. In the beginning of March, they issued a Notice of Proposed Rulemaking by which EPA would adopt 3 SAE standards for equipment that recovers, recycles, and recharges refrigerants in motor vehicle air conditioning systems. The 3 standards are J2843, which is the SAE standard for recovery, recycling, and recharge machines for R-1234yf service, J2851, recovery machines for contaminated refrigerant, and J3030, which covers dual RRR machines designed to work with both R-134a and R-1234yf all in one machine. The new rule intends to provide flexibility for those who wish to select equipment that is certified to these standards. And that concludes this special webinar presentation of MACS Worldwide's 2020 Mobile AC Update. Thanks for joining us, and if you'd like more information, please visit us on our website at www.maxw.org. My name is Steve Shaver, and we'll see you next time. I hope you enjoyed today's webinar. I actually noticed something partway through. Not sure if I said it clearly enough in the webinar or not, but it was the section about certification. And I'm sure all you guys know, the MACS card, the whole reason we originally got it back in the day was so that we could purchase those small cans of R12 when that first purchase restriction went through. But, they extended that original R12 purchase restriction onto 134A and YF, and also 152A and CO2 with the new regulation in 2018. So I'm just going to go up through the chat real quick here. And the only question I see in here is, has any other state other than California, so the California Air Resources Board, mandated that every business performing air conditioning procedures must have a refrigerant identifier used on every vehicle? No, it's only California. And it's actually not CARB, it's BAR. It's Bureau of Auto Repair. They have a rule that talks about how shops have to document AC service at the shop. So it really has to do with consumer protection, because air conditioning is, there's some fudge factor there with a shop doing service on a vehicle and a customer being satisfied with that service down the line. Because, there are shops out there that just do top-offs, and, we see the signs on the side of the road. $59.99 plus refrigerant. There's a lot of guys out there that just top off, get the air cold, send the car on the way. Some of those cars are really bad leakers. 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, the car comes back. Shop says, hey, I fixed it. It was okay at that time. Customer's not happy. Customers end up complaining. It ends up in BAR's lap. So that's why they made those regulations. And part of that is that shops have to document how much refrigerant they recover. They have to document dash outlet temperature, pressure gauge readings, and they make them use a refrigerant identifier to say what the concentration was. I don't know what usage is across the state. If I had to take a guess, compliance is probably somewhere in the 25% range. But I've gotten that question several times over the years about, what's the reg? Why do you have to do it? Who mandates it? But I've looked through the CARB regs before. It's not CARB, it's BAR. There's also, California has 3 different agencies that regulate air conditioning. So you got CARB, BAR, and then there's AQMDs, Air Quality Management Districts. They have a separate regulation. So here's another question I get pretty often. Are you allowed to charge a vehicle that's leaking? And across the US, broadly, there are no federal regulations about that. So you would think that it's kind of common sense. If a vehicle has a leak and you charge it, you know that refrigerant's eventually going to leak out. That's bad for the atmosphere. It costs money. It's bad for the customer. Well, why would you want to do that? Well, there's no regulation federally that says you're not allowed to. But across the country, California, the AQMD has that regulation in all of the air quality management districts, which cover, if it's not the entire state, it may be 1 or 2 districts that don't do it. Other than that, across the US, Albuquerque, New Mexico, parts of Colorado, and the state of Wisconsin also have that same rule that you're not allowed to charge a vehicle that you know is leaking. But they don't require refrigerant identification. Now, that being said, let's go back to the slides we just saw. This has been a topic, questions that have come up over the years, and with this new EPA reg, it's gonna be addressed. So as it stands right now, if there are no federal regulations that require shops and technicians to use a specific machine for YF. So we have YF machines. We had the J2843 and the J3030 equipment. You can buy it. It's designed for YF, the whole 9 yards. But until EPA gets this regulation through, which should be, if they just put out the notice of proposed rulemaking, give it another 3 months, then by the time it becomes final, you're looking at September, October. So this fall, it should be a finalized rule. Then at that time, it'll be a requirement to use that specific equipment. Now, as part of that, the SAE standard says that you have to use an identifier in a J2843 machine or a J3030 machine. So it's kind of not specifically written in the law directly that you have to identify the refrigerant, but it's kind of like, because they reference the SAE standard and the SAE standard says you have to do it, and it all comes back to now you're going to have to identify refrigerant. At least when it comes to YF and the dual machines, you're going to have to. But if you're still servicing 134A, then you're not going to have to use an identifier because it's not part of J2788 standard. So it's a little complicated. Should they just make it part of the rule directly? Maybe. But this is how they do it. They don't directly write the rules in that way. They just reference SAE standards, incorporate them into the rule, and that's how it goes. So other than that, I got a whole bunch of email comments while I was going along, and I just want to say thanks. A quick shout out to Richard. Thank you for that smiley face comment. I thought that was kind of neat. I've used that before in some of my live classes, and guys, get a kick out of it. What's the smiley sticker for? And that's what it's there for, just because it's YF. So it looks like we don't have any other questions in here. The only other comment I want to make about the slides, just the relay getting stuck on. I've seen that quite a bit, and I've gotten questions about that. And I've also gotten questions about, when I do tech support in the summertime, where I've had guys call up complaining that they're not getting cold air to come out when everything seems like it's working, and the whole time it's because the evaporator's clogged. So those two things, you would think they're so simple, a relay that's not working right. Well, a relay stuck on is something that guys don't really consider so often. They're always thinking that, power is not flowing. And if power is flowing, then it must be a control issue. And it is a control issue, but it's in the relay, where basically just from the relays opening, closing so much, eventually the contacts get burned together, and then they stick. So, and as far as the air filter goes, countless times where I get a call and guys can't figure it out. They're, oh, I must be missing something. I don't know. I had charged right. The lines feel like they're cold. The high side feels like it's hot, but I'm not getting cold air to blow out. And, you have to get in there sometimes. You have to pull a blower motor out. Sometimes we've even recommended that you sort of look at the HVAC case under the dashboard and find a spot where you think you're not going to hit into the evaporator or into the heater core and try and drill a tiny hole so that you can fit a fiber optic probe in there so you can look around. And then there's some cases that do have access ports. Sometimes you can take out a temperature sensor. Sometimes there's actually a little door. You can take a screw out and then take a little plastic door off. And of course, a lot of modern stuff, you can just pull out the filters and just look right inside, send a probe in that way. But, just like you would have with a window unit at home, that filter screen that's in there is to catch all that dust. And when the evaporator gets wet, the dust that's in there gets into the water. If it doesn't all drain off, it sticks to the fins, and over time, that builds up, and that's how you get these clogged evaporators. And then, you can also have situations where, that one we had in the pictures was a really bad one. That was, the whole face was clogged. But you can also get situations where you'll get clogging around the sides and maybe an airspace in the middle. But that still provides insulation around the evaporator that affects the temperature and affects airflow. So, when you go to look in there, try, if you can, to look all the way around and see the whole face of it. Because especially once, vehicles get some time on them, that could be a service that you would do. And, I don't think that there's a lot of guys out there that are going to try to pull a case and just clean an evaporator and put it back together. You're going to go into all that extent. You're going to spend the money, get a new core and put that in. So anyway, let's take a look at the chat real quick. Here's one. What are the areas that have the no refill if leaking rule in the US? Are they using forming gas like we see in Europe? No, I don't think they're using forming gas. About the closest thing to forming gas that's used here is nitrogen. And it's really used not in automotive and light truck, but it's used in heavy equipment. So I wouldn't even say so much like construction equipment shops, but I've seen nitrogen used for nitrogen purging, for pressure decay testing, and for leak testing, particularly in shops that work on fire apparatus, fire trucks, ambulances, emergency equipment, and ag. And also construction equipment too, but I'm not talking about like your local construction company, more of the bigger guys that do that. But they use nitrogen. They use it in the factory when they build components. They use it in the factory when they build equipment, and they use it to test the machines first before they charge it with refrigerant. But in the automotive side in the U.S., it's really, your R-134A is still so cheap. It's very prevalent, easy to get. So I think it's really just along the lines of, adding something new. Why add something new? So we already have 134A. If you think it's a leak, charge it with 134A, go around with your electronic leak detector and see if you can find it. A little bit different when you're talking about a system that's really big, like a school bus, where, you may have 3 separate air conditioning systems on one school bus. So you'll have one compressor with an evaporator condenser that runs the dash unit. Then you'll have a second compressor that may run another evaporator for the middle of the bus, and then a third compressor running an evaporator for the rear of the bus. So if you're going to charge and leak test all that, and you have to put 6 pounds of refrigerant in each system, or maybe it's 4 in one, 5 in the other, or whatever, that's a lot of money to leak out if the leak is bad enough. So in those situations, guys will use, the tall stand-up nitrogen tanks with a pressure regulator, drop it down. Tanks are running somewhere around 2,000 PSI, so they'll regulate it down to about 120 PSI, and just pressurize it and, look for decay over time. So the areas in the U.S. I mentioned already that have the no refill if leaking is the air quality management districts in California. And then it's Albuquerque, New Mexico. I'm not sure it's the whole state of Colorado. It might be, but I'm sure it's Denver. And it's the state of Wisconsin. So those are the 3 main ones. The other one that comes to mind, I'm not sure if it's still part of the regulation or not, would be South Florida, because Miami-Dade has their own separate little thing when it comes to air conditioning. So I would have to double check on that to find out if Miami-Dade has no refill if leaking regulation. But the other ones I know, because I wrote a column about that 3 or 4 years ago. So, well, it looks like the questions on the chat are done. Let me just check the email. We have one more from Mr. Paul. His comment is a J3030 machine may work on both refrigerants, but it also may be designed to work on one, typically R-1234A, and go through a tamper-resistant changeover to R-1234yf. The Yellow Jacket machine is an example of this. Yes, it is. So we have 2 examples right now of the J3030 machines. One of them we actually have over here in the classroom is a snap-on machine. And the snap-on Polartec Dual is R-1234A and YF in one unit. And it's like the old school charge carts that we had in the 90s that did R12 and 134A. It's basically a big giant cart with 2 separate machines built into one unit. So that machine has 2 separate internal tanks, 2 separate sets of plumbing, 2 separate sets of hoses, but there is one control panel. So just one digital readout, there's actually a printer on it, and 2 sets of gauges, one for each side of the machine. The CPS machine, I don't know if I can get that up here on the screen. I don't think I can. But the CPS machine has 1 internal tank, or actually it has 1 tank you put on at one time. So you have an external tank for the refrigerant for the machine, and you have to swap it out each time. There's a procedure you go through in the controller where you tell the machine, now I want to change over to 134A, hit go, then the machine will basically purge itself into its external tank. When it's done, you remove that tank, put on your new one, then the machine will have you go through a sequence, and it'll basically get itself ready to work with that new refrigerant that you switched to. So you have to go through that every time. We did some testing with that here at MACS. It doesn't take that long. Once you get used to doing the changeover procedure, I haven't done it in about a year. I want to take a guess. It's maybe 10 to 15 minutes for a changeover. But, it's really up to the shop. I mean, you have to look at the cost of the equipment, changeover time, what do you want for what works best for your business. Also, the footprint that the machine takes up on the floor. The CPS machine is a little bit smaller than the larger snap-on machine. But they both worked really well for us for what we were doing here for our SAE testing. So let me take one more look. All right, I think that's it. I see nothing else in the chat, so cool. All right, guys, well, hey, thanks very much for hanging out with me today for this webinar. Have a good day, and we'll see you next time.